A gracious good day to one and all once again. 'Tis I, Norton the First, by grace of God, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, back with you once again for episode number 177 of Emperor Norton's fantastic history vlog. Today is December 30th, 2020. We are covering December 30th to January 5th in today's vlog, and it is our 295th day living under COVID-19 restrictions with some hope on the horizon, but really no end in sight. We don't know when this is all going to be over. The vaccine is out there, but it doesn't seem to be reaching people for some reason. And of course, the pandemic is raging wildly. There are many more cases than there have ever been, not only here within the empire, but worldwide. And there are many more deaths every day. And we hope this will all be over soon. But since this is our last vlog of 2020, we thought this would be a good time to do a fond farewell for the year. Let's just call it that. We started this vlog on March 19, thinking that it would only be done perhaps 2 or 3 months, that things would be back to normal during the summer. But of course, that didn't happen due to numerous factors, but most of all due to a lack of leadership, I would say. And it's continued to gotten worse throughout the year. There's no safety net. People are being forced out of houses. They're not able to buy groceries. A small pittance of $600 was given to the people of the empire by Congress last week, but of course, much more is needed. To paraphrase our dear friend, Queen Elizabeth II, this has truly been an annus horribilis, and hopefully 2021 will be better. So we'll see you on the other side of the new year for our weekend vlog with the Countess Lola Montez, which we know you all look forward to. Well, enough of that. Let us begin with our national days, shall we? Starting with today, the 30th of December, it is National Bacon Day. There's something we can definitely get behind. Yes, indeed. And to go with it, we suppose National Bicarbonate of Soda Day. That's what people used to take when they had an upset stomach. That's basically what Alka-Seltzer is, yes. The 31st, New Year's Eve, what else? National Champagne Day. What champagne are you drinking on New Year's? Leave it in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, very important. And as we'll be saying a few times throughout the vlog today, here's the information where you can leave donations for us. They are greatly needed right now and much appreciated. Well, what comes after drinking a bunch of champagne on New Year's Eve? A hangover. And what's the best way to cure a hangover? A little bit of the hair of the dog that bit you. So New Year's Day is Bloody Mary Day. Much thanks to Greg Took for his wonderful Facebook page, My Big Fat Bloody Mary. It's 9 a.m. somewhere. The 2nd of January is Buffet Day. We don't think buffets are going to be making much of a comeback after the pandemic's over, but who knows? We'll see. We love a good buffet, but oh well, may not be that. The 3rd is Humiliation Day. Now, this is not a day to humiliate people. It's actually a day to raise awareness around bullying and humiliation. So don't do that. No, don't bully, don't humiliate other people. Treat people as you would like to be treated. Yes. The 4th is National Spaghetti Day. Oh, who doesn't love spaghetti? Yes, we certainly do. And the 5th is National Whipped Cream Day for some reason that remains a total mystery to us. So, let's now move on to our Florida Man segment. There were a lot, some were for some reason around the New Year's, but we chose 3 highlights to give to you today. Starting with the 30th, Florida man screaming about vampires allegedly sets fire in his own house. The 4th of January, Florida man arrested after hitting dad with pizza because he was mad he helped birth him. Happy Father's Day. And the fifth, Florida man wakes up to find another man sucking on his toes. You never know what's going to happen with Florida man, indeed. Well, for our longer San Francisco history segment today, we rely on John Ralston's wonderful book, This Date in San Francisco, which we will be reading from, as we have been with this vlog. Come March, we don't really know what we're going to do. But repeat stories? Find new ones, probably. If we are still doing the vlog, then we have, of course, promised to do this vlog as long as we're under shelter in place. So we'll see. Well, our first story today, actually somebody who has somewhat of a connection to us. Fremont Older takes over the Bulletin, which is the newspaper that published our proclamation back in 1859 declaring ourselves emperor. But he was not editor then, he was editor later, and we'll come to his other connection with us in a moment. Fremont Older was a self-educated newspaperman from an impoverished, Wisconsin family whose men had been wiped out in the Civil War. Arriving in San Francisco in 1873 with railroad fare loaned by his grandfather, he began a career as a typesetter all over California. After a chance encounter led him to getting a permanent job in Redwood City, he established himself as a San Mateo County correspondent and reporter before returning to San Francisco in 1884. Older's talent for going beneath the surface of events got him noticed by the editor of the Morning Call. And in 1895, his career culminated in becoming managing editor of the San Francisco Evening Bulletin. The Bulletin, founded by vitrolic James King in 1855, was the oldest newspaper in continuous publication in San Francisco. By 1895, it had deteriorated badly. Circulation 9,000, no advertising to speak of, obsolete equipment, almost no staff, no capital, quarters in a ramshackle building. Within a year, Older had moved the Bulletin to a downtown location at Kearny and Bush, installed new presses, enlarged staff to over 20, and had increased circulation to the largest of any evening newspaper west of Chicago. Giant journalistically, physically, and intellectually, Older had a unique gift for attracting and developing talent. His cartoonists included Tad Dorgan, Jimmy Hatlow, and Rube Goldberg. Writers included Rose Wilder Lane, Maxwell Anderson, Bessie Beatty, Eugene Block, Robert L. Doofus. Boy, there's a name I'd change. Reporters and editors included Ernest J. Hopkins, Scoop Gleason, Hy Baggerly, Older's brother-in-law, and Carl Hoffman. Older would be so involved in San Francisco for the next 40 years that to speak of one was to speak of the other. And it is from Fremont Older that we've gotten the continuation of the Bummer and Lazarus myth. This could take up a whole show. Long story short, Bummer and Lazarus were two dogs that were very famous in San Francisco in the 1860s. And they followed us around. And many people believe that they were our dogs, but they indeed were not. And there's a wonderful book by Malcolm E. Barker called Bummer and Lazarus, San Francisco's Famous Dogs, that really puts the myth to rest. He went through all the newspapers during both the lifetimes of Bummer and Lazarus and our lifetime and found no stories at that time that connected us. And so the continuation of the myth involves one of the few times, in fact, probably the only time, that Fremont Older and we met. And this is a quote from a Morning Call story about that. When I came to the city in 1873, I met the Emperor on Montgomery Street. His old pals, the two vagrant dogs, Bummer and Lazarus, were dead when I arrived. Well, they'd already died. They weren't dead when he arrived. When they were living, they followed him everywhere, and the three were welcome in all saloons where the Emperor fed himself and the dogs from the free lunch counter. After Bummer and Lazarus died, he traveled alone. Lazarus was stuffed and placed in a glass case on the wall of Van Bergen's saloon on Sansom Street near Clay Street, and that's true. I saw him there eating solemnly at the lunch counter. Suddenly he turned his eyes on the stuffed figure of Lazarus and tears rolled down his cheeks. "My old friend," he said in a trembling voice. Possibly made up, we'll never know. We'll devote a whole show to Bummer and Lazarus sometime, or take the tour, you'll hear the story. Our second story today is a little bit longer, but a very important figure in our city's history. Sonny Jim Rolph bids farewell. This is from January 3rd, 1931. James Rolph Jr. was born on Minna Street in the Mission District in 1869, the oldest of 7 children. 37 at the time of the Great San Francisco earthquake and fire, he helped organize the Mission Relief Association for families who had been burned out. He was prominent in the 1909 Portola Festival, the first big event since 1906, and in organizing the Panama Pacific International Exposition of 1915. Mayor Patrick H. McCarthy, elected in 1909, was a disappointment, and Rolph was persuaded to run in 1911. Campaigning as Sonny Jim, Rolph was elected overwhelmingly and would serve 19 years or almost 5 4-year terms. Chronicle writer Earl C. Behrens hailed Rolph's terms as, quote, a period of continuous service longer than that given by any other man as chief executive of any major American city. Rolph loved his city as much or more than anyone who ever held office anywhere. Achievements of his first 2 terms were monumental. Civic Center, including the City Hall, the main library, now the Asian Art Museum, the Exposition Auditorium, Civic Auditorium, Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, the Municipal Railway, the first such public utility in the United States, the new San Francisco General Hospital, the Panama Pacific International Exposition. Rolph's later terms were less distinguished, and he suffered financial reverses and ill health, but he kept his sunny disposition. In office, leading parades, throwing out the season's first baseball, inaugurating streetcar lines, Sonny Jim was everywhere. Except at our reburial, unfortunately, he had pneumonia that day, and John McLaren, superintendent of parks, stood in his place. That was in 1934. But in 1930, Rolph was persuaded to run for governor by political leaders who thought his style would be an antidote to the Depression. Republican incumbent Clement C. Young favored prohibition, and with another dry Republican candidate running in the primary, the dry votes were split, giving Rolph a wet the nomination. Elected overwhelmingly in November, Rolph officially resigned the mayoralty on June 3rd, 1931, at a ceremony at the magnificent City Hall that he had dedicated. Rolph promised to aim to be a good governor, one who would try and bring smiles and happiness into every city and hamlet in California. Sadly, he could not fulfill the promise. Smiling at the Depression didn't work. Rolph's inauguration on January 4th was the most elaborate in years, Sacramento being hung with banners proclaiming, "Smile with Sonny Jim." But it was marred by demonstrations for Tom Mooney, whose unjust incarceration for the Preparedness Day bombing, there's a whole other story, I think we've already done it actually, based on perjured testimony Rolph had ignored. Another Mooney demonstration occurred as Rolph presided at the 1932 Los Angeles Olympic Games. In 1933, 2 men were accused of the kidnapped murder of the son of a wealthy San Jose merchant. Rolph said he could not call out the National Guard to protect the accused, an invitation to mob action. A mob stormed the county jail, beat up the sheriff's deputies, and lynched the men. Rolph called it a good job and said he would pardon anyone convicted of it. Critics said lynching should henceforth be called Rolphing. Rolfing's a whole other thing, though. Rolph's health declined and he died suddenly in June 1934 without finishing his term as governor. His funeral was one of the biggest in San Francisco's history. So there's an interesting question. Was it the pneumonia that he had when our reburial took place at the Woodlawn Cemetery? By the way, and we'll talk about this more next week, the anniversary of our death is coming up. We'll talk about that more a week from today. Well, let's move on to our other history for the next week. Starting with the 30th, 1835, Georgia Gold Rush forces the Cherokees to move across the Mississippi River, the Trail of Tears. 1879, Gilbert and Sullivan's Pirates of Penzance premieres. Now, we are a big fan of Gilbert and Sullivan. Always wanted to play the Lord High Executioner in the Mikado. Maybe someday we will. But one of the songs from Pirates of Penzance is Modern Major General. And our dear nephew, he is the Archduke, that's it, Archduke David Thomas, who has dominion over the state of New Mexico, we just gave him that last week, wrote a version that relates back to us, and we'll just read, maybe sing a little bit of it. This is a tough song to sing because it's so fast, so we're gonna slow it down. We'll just do the first couple verses. I am the very model of a modern major emperor. I proclamations historical and anachronism temporal. I govern lands of America and protect those of fine Mexico from Cancun onto Morelia in order geographical. Anyway, you get the idea. We'll do the whole thing at some point after we've rehearsed it more. But thank you, Dave, for doing that. And happy birthday once again. Moving on. 1903, electric arc lamps set fire to Iroquois Theater in Chicago, leaving 602 dead in one of the deadliest blazes in American history. Now, if you have ever taken any technical theater classes, especially in college, as we did, the Iroquois Theater fire is always talked about in those classes. One of the worst theater fires and deadliest blazes in American history. 1924, astronomer Edwin Hubble formally announces the existence of other galactic systems at a meeting of the American Astronomical Society. That discovery, by the way, was made at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Southern California. Speaking of Southern California, 1940, California's first freeway, the Arroyo Seco Parkway, opens, now known as the Pasadena Freeway. 1963, Congress authorizes the Kennedy $50. Let's move on to the 31st, New Year's Eve. 1695, a window tax is imposed in England, causing many shopkeepers to brick up their windows to avoid the tax. Never knew that one. 1879, the cornerstone is laid for Honolulu's Iolani Palace, the only royal palace in the U.S. What about the places where we lived? 1904, first New Year's Eve celebration held in Times Square, then Longacre Square in New York City. 1907, for the first time, a ball drops at Times Square to signal the new year. 1921, the last San Francisco fire horses are retired. 1945, ratification of the United Nations Charter is completed. It was signed on June 26th of that year here in San Francisco. 1961, the Beach Boys play their debut gig under that name, because previously they were called the Pendletones, I guess because they wore Pendleton shirts. 1967, Evel Knievel fails in his attempt to jump the Caesars Palace fountain in Las Vegas, breaking his pelvis, femur, wrist, hip, and both ankles. 1970, Congress authorizes the Eisenhower dollar coin. 1995, sad day. Cartoonist Bill Watterson ends Calvin and Hobbes after 10 years, believing he'd achieved all he could in the medium. We hope Calvin and Hobbes will come back again someday. We most certainly miss it. Moving on to the first, there's a lot, because a lot of laws, things like that, are enacted. Well, not enacted, but become law on the 1st of January. Well, let's move on. 1818, official opening of the White House after the War of 1812. Also 1818, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, is published anonymously. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation issued by Abraham Lincoln to free slaves in the United States Confederate States, U.S. Confederate States. 1880, the building of the Panama Canal begins. 1881, Ambrose Bierce is appointed editor of the San Francisco-based The Wasp magazine. 1890, the Rose Parade, then known as the Tournament of Roses, is first held in Pasadena, California. 1892, Ellis Island opens as a U.S. immigration station. It would go on to be the gateway to the U.S. for more than 12 million people. 1898, Lightship replaces the Whistling Buoy at the mouth of the San Francisco Bay. 1907, President Theodore Wilson shakes a record 8,513 hands in one day. Ooh, that must have hurt. 1912, the first running of San Francisco's famed Bay to Breakers foot race. 7.63 miles. First winner was Robert Vlucht at 44 minutes and 10 seconds. Not bad. 1912, Sun Yat-sen forms the Republic of China. 1939, Hewlett-Packard is founded by Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard in a garage in Palo Alto, California, the birthplace of the Silicon Valley. I had no idea that went all the way back to 1939. 1946, Emperor Hirohito of Japan announces he is not a god. No one's ever told us that. 1975, H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, John Mitchell are convicted of the Watergate crimes. Another day in comic strip history. 1995, The Last Far Side by cartoonist Gary Larson. He started in 1980. And he has actually come back. If you go to his website, he is drawing new strips. They're not very often, and he's doing them on a computer, so they look a little bit different, but at least he is back in some form. Maybe more will come. 1999, the last euro currency. The euro currency is introduced. Sorry about that. 2018, California becomes the largest U.S. state to legalize cannabis for recreational use. Far out, man. Moving on to the second, 1903, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt shuts down the post office in Indianola, Mississippi for refusing to accept its appointed postmistress because she was black. 1921, the DeYoung Museum in Golden Gate Park opens. 1929, U.S. and Canada agree to preserve Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls. Slowly I turned, step by step, inch by inch. I hope somebody gets that joke. We've done it here before, of course. 1941, World War II. The U.S. government announces its Liberty Ship program to build freighters in support of the war effort. Oh, they were built here at Hunters Point and Sausalito and in Richmond. I don't think Mare Island was where they were built, but they may have been. But San Francisco was, of course, pivotal to the building of the Liberty ships. And don't forget to, when things open up again, to see the Jeremiah O'Brien, the best preserved Liberty ship of them all here in San Francisco. Another comic strip history today. 1983, Gary Trudeau takes a 20-month break from writing Doonesbury. Now, he is only doing it on Sundays now. The Sunday strips have been great, but the daily strips are now a rerun. Maybe he'll come back someday. Probably not, but it'd be nice if he did. Well, let's move on to the third. 1496, Leonardo da Vinci unsuccessfully tests a flying machine. 1521, Martin Luther is excommunicated by Pope Leo X from the Roman Catholic Church for failing to recant parts of his 95 Theses, which started the Protestant Reformation. 1870, construction begins on New York's Brooklyn Bridge, finished May 24th. 1883, 13 years it took. 1889, German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche suffers a mental breakdown after supposedly witnessing a horse flogging. You know, there's nothing Nietzsche couldn't teach you about the raisin of the wrist. 1912, the Southern Pacific Railway offers to bring the Liberty Bell to the Panama Pacific Exposition in 1915 in San Francisco for free, and it was here. 1925, Benito Mussolini dissolves the Italian parliament and proclaims himself dictator of Italy, taking the title Il Duce, which means the leader. 1938, March of Dimes established to fight polio. Remember the polio vaccine? That worked very, very well. Remember that when you're talking about the COVID vaccine. They help. They don't kill you. They don't create problems like autism and things like that. Oh well, enough pontificating. We'll move on. 1959, Alaska admitted as the 49th U.S. state. 1977, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs incorporate Apple Computer. We are a dedicated Apple user going back to 1990. This entire vlog is shot, edited, and uploaded from an iPhone. So we're a Big Apple fan. 2009, the Bitcoin network is created as the first block of the digital currency is mined by a person or a group of people using the name Satoshi Nakamoto. Moving on to the 4th, 1849, the Alta California begins publication. 1865, the New York Stock Exchange opens its first permanent headquarters at 10 to 12 Broad Street near Wall Street in New York City. 1896, following Mormon abandonment of polygamy, Utah is admitted as the 45th state. Let's move on now to the 5th. 1886, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson is published, and he spent time here in San Francisco, wrote about us. 1895, French Captain Alfred Dreyfus, convicted of treason, publicly stripped of his rank, later exonerated. That was a very anti-Semitic trial. 1911, San Francisco has its first air meet. Actually, it was in San Bruno at the Tanforan airstrip. Oh well. 1933, work on the Golden Gate Bridge begins, starting on the Marin County side. 1953, Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot premieres in Paris. They're still waiting. By the way, if anybody has any access to the version of Waiting for Godot that was done by Robin Williams, Steve Martin, and the great clown, Bill Irwin, I've only been able to find about a 3-minute segment, and for some reason they never videotaped it. It must have been incredible. From the 3-minute segment we have seen, it was. Can you imagine that cast doing that play? Wow. And let's see, back to the vlog. 1959, Bozo the Clown live children's show premieres on TV. 1972, U.S. President Nixon signs a bill for NASA to begin research on a manned space shuttle. Let's now move on to our births for the next week. Beginning in 1865, Rudyard Kipling. Ooh, he didn't like San Francisco very much when he got here. He wrote a scathing letter to his father about just how much he despised it here, but would later write, San Francisco has one drawback, 'tis hard to leave. 1935, our favorite baseball player of all time, Sandy Koufax. 1942, Michael Nesmith of the Monkees. 1947, Jeff Lynne, British rock singer, songwriter, record producer, ELO. He produced the Threetles singles when they got the three Beatles back together with a cassette tape of John Lennon. He's an incredible musician. He was in the Traveling Wilburys with George Harrison and Bob Dylan and Tom Petty and Roy Orbison and, of course, George Harrison. I think I've already said that. Anyway, great group. Check out their record if you haven't seen it before. And 1963, Mike Pompeo, the current Secretary of State. Didn't know he was born in Orange, California. Thanks, Orange County. Well, let's move on now to the 31st. 1869, Henri Matisse, the great French impressionist. 1908, Simon Wiesenthal, Jewish Austrian Holocaust survivor and Nazi hunter. 1942, musician Andy Summers of The Police has also had a solo career. 1946, Patti Smith. Oh, we like Patti Smith a lot. We saw her at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium in 1946 when she came out, and the first thing she sang was, Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. I know, it wasn't very good. 1946, fashion designer Diane von Furstenberg. 1947, Tim Matheson, actor, was great in Animal House, Fletch, Up the Creek. 1948, the disco singer Donna Summer, Love to Love You, Baby. 1948 as well, Joe D'Alessandro, one of the Andy Warhol superstars, mentioned in the Lou Reed song, oh God, the name suddenly just escaped me. And the color girls go do 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 do. It'll come to me sometime in the middle of the night. Little Joe never once gave it away. Everybody had to pay and pay. A hustle here and a hustle there in New York City. Walk on the wild side. We knew we'd get it eventually. Ooh, we're running over today. Well, anyway, 1959, Bebe Neuwirth. Of course, we saw her on Cheers, where she played Lilith. Also occasionally on Frasier, but she's mainly known as a fantastic Broadway star. 1977, Donald Trump Jr. Happy birthday. Let's move on to the first. 1735, Paul Revere, American silversmith, patriot, who alerted the colonial militia to the approach of the British forces. The British are coming! The British are coming! That's him. 1752, Betsy Ross, the designer of the first American flag. 1864, photographer Alfred Stieglitz. 1895, J. Edgar Hoover, first head of the FBI. 1919, J.D. Salinger, who wrote Catcher in the Rye. 1935, B. Kliban, the American cartoonist known for his cats. 1951, arguably the greatest bass player ever, Jaco Pastorius. And 1958, you want to talk about old school rap, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. Let's move on to the second now. 1909, former Senator Barry Goldwater. 1920, author Isaac Asimov. 1932, Dabney Coleman, lots of TV shows, and of course, 9 to 5, the movie. 1939, Jim Baker, shamed American televangelist from the PTL Club, husband of I'm having a little bit of memory trouble today, Tammy Faye. Yes, indeed, with the great mascara running. He's back on TV trying to rip people off, selling survival supplies. So buy those buckets of soup from him, I guess. Well, don't, rather. Anyway, let's see. Also, on the second, Linda Berry, a great cartoonist. Moving on to the third, 1897, actor Marion Davies, mistress of William Randolph Hearst, hostess at San Simeon. 1897, Pola Negri, one of the great stars of the silent era. Another one, 1898, Zazu Pitts, but also did sound movies as well. 1905, another actor, Ray Milland. Another one from 1907, Anna May Wong. Great actors. 1909, Victor Borge, born in Copenhagen, Denmark. Fans will get that. 1918, Maxine Andrews, one of the Andrews sisters. 1926, George Martin, the record producer, arguably the fifth Beatle. 1946, John Paul Jones, another musician. 1956, Mel Gibson. 1967, Helena Bonham Carter, who's been great in The Crown. 2003, Greta Thunberg, Swedish climate activist. Happy 18th birthday, Greta. Moving on to the fourth, Jacob Grimm, German philologist, whatever that is, folklorist and editor of Grimm's fairy tales. And they are rather grim, by the way. 1809, Louis Braille, French educator, Louis, I guess, Braille then, and inventor of the system of reading and writing for the blind. 1914, Jane Wyman, the first Mrs. Ron Reagan, but also an actor in her own right, Magnificent Obsession. Speaking of actors, 1937, Diane Cannon, who played Sally Stanford. Look at our last episode, number 176, for more on that. 1963, Dave Foley, actor, comedian, Kids in the Hall, News Radio. Moving on to the fifth, 1855, Kingsley Gillette, American businessman and inventor of the inexpensive and disposable safety razor blades. 1914, George Reeves, one of the actors who has played Superman. 1928, Walter Mondale, a senator and 42nd Vice President of the United States. 1931, the incredible choreographer Alvin Ailey. 1931, also Robert Duvall, a great actor, born in San Diego, by the way. 1946, Diane Keaton. So many roles. But of course, we know her from Annie Hall. 1949, Chris Stein, rock guitarist, for the group Blondie, also the boyfriend of Deborah Harry. 1950, Michael O'Donoghue, somewhat obscure comedy writer unless you're a fan of the National Lampoon and the early seasons of Saturday Night Live. Mr. Mike. He had a very twisted sense of humor. One of his ongoing bits was doing imitations of people after they'd had their eyes gouged out by ice picks, pardon me. Yes, he was kind of strange. Speaking of strange, 1969, Marilyn Manson. Let's now move on to our deaths for today. The 30th, we said goodbye in 1525 to Jacob Fugger, now not the one who's associated with the Emperor Norton Legacy League, our Prince Regent, I believe he is in the Empire. No, this was a German banker merchant who died at 66. 1979, Richard Rogers and Hammerstein. 1988, Isamu Noguchi, Japanese-American sculptor, great sculptor. 2006, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein was hanged in Baghdad. Let's move on to the 31st. 1980, Marshall McLuhan, a writer, wrote the book Medium is the Message. 2000, former senator from California, Alan Cranston. Let's move on to the first. 1958, Edward Weston, American photographer. 1985, Ricky Nelson, singer, actor, Ozzie and Harriet, dies at 45 in a plane crash, unfortunately. I guess he's up in rock and roll heaven now. 1988, Leo Steiner, American restaurateur, owner of the Carnegie Deli in New York, which unfortunately is closed. 1992, Grace Hopper, American computer scientist, U.S. Navy admiral who invented the first compiler for Universal Computer Programming Language and is credited with coining the phrase debugging. 1994, Cesar Romero, who had a considerable movie career, but most people probably remember him as the Joker on the Batman TV series, and he was a great Joker. Oh, that is probably the best role that one could ever get in Batman, I think. 2005, Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American Congress member. 2015, Mario Cuomo, the 52nd governor of New York from 1983 to 1995. Let's move on now to the second. Ovid, the Roman poet, wrote Metamorphoses. 1953, Guccio Gucci, the Italian founder of Gucci Fashion House. 1974, Tex Ritter, the country singer, also the father of John Ritter, the actor. 1990, Alan Hale Jr., skipper on Gilligan's Island, who, by the way, his real name was Jonas Grumby. He had a restaurant in Los Angeles not long after the show called Skipper Alan Hale's Lobster Barrel. I think it was in Marina del Rey. Well, let's move on to the third. Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, Portuguese-Spanish conquistador who conquered Central America and later discovered California, although I think it was already here. 1875, George Bizet. 1895, James Merritt Ives, American lithographer and businessman, Currier and Ives. 1903, Alois Hitler, father of Adolf Hitler. You know, maybe if he'd been a little bit nicer to him and encouraged his art career, world history would have been much, much different. Yes. 1967, Jack Ruby, the American assassin of Lee Harvey Oswald, who allegedly assassinated President Kennedy. We'll never know for sure. 1980, Joy Adamson, who wrote Born Free, was murdered by her servant. 2005, Will Eisner, one of the giants of American cartooning. He was one of the early artists for Mad magazine. He did The Spirit. His last graphic novel, The Plot, is about the elders of Zion and the whole myth behind that. It's a great, great book. The Eisners are a coveted award for American cartoonists. He was a giant in that field. 2015, Edward W. Brooke, American politician and first popularly elected African-American to the U.S. Senate. Moving on to the fourth, in the year 41, Caligula was murdered, and I think he had it coming. 1960, Albert Camus, the French author. What does an existential cow say? Camus. We think we've used that joke before. 1961, Erwin Schrödinger, Austrian physicist and Nobel laureate, wave mechanics, and of course Schrödinger's cat. Is it or isn't it? 1965, T.S. Eliot, American-born British poet, Nobel laureate, 1948. What's the T.S. stand for? Tough. Well, never mind. We'll go there. Speaking of writers, 1986, the extraordinary Christopher Isherwood, who wrote Berlin Stories, which was turned into a play called I Am a Camera, which was turned into a musical, Cabaret. Moving on to the 5th, 1933, Calvin Coolidge, the 30th president. 1939, Amelia Earhart, the aviator, is declared dead at 41. Now, she actually disappeared in 1937, but she was not declared dead until the 5th of January, 1941. 1943, George Washington Carver, African-American agricultural scientist, studied the peanut. 1982, Hans Conried, an actor. He was Uncle Tanoose on Make Room for Daddy. He did a lot of voices on The Bullwinkle Show. But my favorite work by him is The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. And he's delightful. And I think we've talked about that before. It's one of our favorite movies. 1990, Arthur Kennedy, the actor. 1994, Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, from 1977 to 1986. 1998, Sonny Bono, of course famous for Sonny and Cher, but he was also, and he was at the time of his death, a member of the House of Representatives. He died in a skiing accident. I believe his wife, Mary Bono, is still serving in his seat. She's been reelected numerous times to that seat. And 2007, Momofuku Ando, Taiwanese-Japanese inventor of instant noodles and cup noodles. If you've ever had ramen, he's the man to thank. And in fact, there's a lot of upscale ramen restaurants now. We have a couple here in San Francisco named Momofuku in his honor. And he died of heart failure at 96. So if they tell you that ramen's unhealthy, well, you know, Momofuku lived to 96 eating ramen a lot. So who knows? Watch the sodium. And our quote today, actually, we're ending with a couple quotes from Momofuku. He said a lot of very good things, but here's two to end the vlog with today. There can be no invention in the absence of tenacity. Indeed. And peace will come to the world when all its people have enough to eat. And at $3 for $1, ramen could feed the world, we suppose. Well, that wraps it up for today's edition. We went long today, but there was a lot to talk about. Don't forget, we do accept donations. Here's the information for that. They are very needed right now because of Congress's inaction and President Trump's delays on getting more money to Americans who desperately need it, and we do. So please make a donation. Please remember us in your New Year's giving. Also, if you'd like more information about San Francisco history or the tours that the Countess and I will be doing again, hopefully in mid to early 2021, we shall see. We have to wait till everything goes back to the yellow level here in San Francisco before we start up tours again. Anyway, here's the information for that. A happy new year to one and all. May 2021 be far, far, far better than 2020, and it wouldn't take much. So until we see you again, stay safe, stay inside, and therefore stay healthy. But if you do go outside, just wear the mask. We get tired of saying that. And we get even more tired of seeing people either not wearing them or wearing them to here. Air comes out through your nose, or wearing them down to here. Sorry, you're not fooling anyone, and you're certainly not helping anyone by doing that. Do not take unproven cures. My rule, I will not do anything unless Dr. Fauci says it's okay. And we certainly hope he gets the Presidential Medal of Freedom, or Presidential Medal of Honor. I think it's the Presidential Medal of Freedom next year. He deserves it for not just his response to COVID, but also to HIV/AIDS as well. The man is a hero. Be kind to one another, most of all, especially as a great New Year's resolution. Until we see you again, a gracious good day.